Let's get this show on the road here. So good morning, aloha, everybody. Okay, I'm not quite as loud and as enthusiastic sounding as what we had in the keynote, but let's do that again. All right, aloha. All right. So hey, looks like everybody survived Halloween night in Waikiki last night. So y'all have a good time. All right, and thank you for coming and choosing to come into our session here. So, we got a treat for you this morning. I'm a day late, but I think you'll enjoy this the list of speakers that we have for you rather than chocolate from yesterday. So, seriously, I am honored and privileged to be the moderator for this distinguished and august group of speakers that we have today. I don't feel like anybody can hear me. Are we good here? Okay. So, among our speakers, we have a retired Major General from the Army. We have the director of one of the national UARCs, Navy UARCs, one of only 5 that the Department of Navy has. Okay. We have an Air Force colonel that is responsible for the entire science and technology engagement of Indo-Pacific Command. Not too hard of a job, only 32 nations. We have the executive director of a national consortium that runs about 400 plus companies, and he leads all those companies to do meaningful things for the DoD and for the Department of Defense. And then you have me. So 4 out of 5 isn't too bad, okay? So this session title is Enabling Technologies with Our Partners and Allies. And we've got the right speakers for you. I think through the speeches and the briefs, you will see that it's going to enlighten your minds. It's going to open up your thought process. And I subscribe to the theory that I am definitely going to go to bed smarter tonight than I was last night. Okay, so let's get kicked off, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker, General Bob Lee, U.S. Army retired. Major General Lee was appointed the Adjutant General, State of Hawaii, Department of Defense on January 1st, 2003, and served until January 8, 2011. In addition to commanding 5,500 soldiers and airmen, General Lee managed an operating budget of nearly $400 million annually for the State Department of Defense. During his tenure as Adjutant General, he also served as a member of Secretary of Army's Reserve Forces Policy Committee from January 2005 to January 2008. He was appointed by President George W. Bush for service on the Secretary of Defense's Reserve Forces Policy Board from September 2007 to 2010. And as if that wasn't enough, he's a very accomplished golfer. And the last time we were out in the golf course together, he demolished me and made me go back to the practice range every day. So maybe after 3 or 4 years of COVID and practicing, I might be ready for him. General Lee, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Suji. Mahalo. Just want to say you're all kind of stuck with me going that far back. The current Adjutant General and his deputy is traveling, and another successor of mine is also on the road. And then the last guy failed retirement miserably. Now he's the police chief and can't be here. So that's why I'm addressing you all today. And you may be wondering, what the hell is a state partnership, and what does a state partnership have to do with TechNet, Pacific in 2022? So I wanted to quickly get into the quick topics and see if we could tie some things together from a program that nobody wanted in 1990 after the fall and the dissolution of the Soviet Empire. Why the hell is the National Guard doing the state partnership program? And then what might be some of the ties and technology as we quickly bring to the fight what's happening in Ukraine and Russia with the state partnership program with the state of California, and how this might translate to some of the challenges in the Pacific, primarily Taiwan and China. So as I mentioned, with the dissolution of the Soviet Empire, we had a lot of former Warsaw Pact nations kind of out in the cold, and the National Guard made the effort to kind of line up with this former Warsaw Pact nations, Eastern European countries, started with Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the first of the three partners, and then branched into 13 former Soviet countries in 1993. So the key here is the state of California was assigned Ukraine, and the National Guard tried to ethnically balance the initial lineup. For example, the large Polish American population resided in Illinois. So Illinois had Poland, and so it started in UCOM and Eastern European, the theater. And of course, DOD was not supportive back then. Why are you wasting your money and effort on a state partnership program where all we intended to do was to shore up American values and our way of doing business, promote democracy in these new former Warsaw Pact countries, and build up their militaries so they could sustain and defend themselves. You could see what a great job that Illinois did with Poland. They're not on the receiving end of state partnerships anymore. They are a giver. They provide security. So for the state of Hawaii, just a couple of examples. When I got assigned, we inherited the Philippines, and we did the normal, primarily military engagement was in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief with medical assistance. But with September 11, 2001, we rapidly engaged in counterterrorism with the armed forces of the Philippines. So Hawaii Army National Guard, soldiers in particular, went on every security assistance down south to Holo and Zamboanga, and we wanted to make sure that the teams in this state partnership, we wanted to staff that security team with about 30% ethnic Filipino Americans that had some understanding of the language, even if it was Tagalog from up north. That half the team had combat experience from Iraq and Afghanistan, and the other portion of the team that we got from the members of our force, that in civilian life, they were school teachers, policemen, and regular folks that will support institutions that over the time, we made it virtually impossible for the Abu Sayyaf to reach the population of the Philippines, especially down in the south. For Indonesia, wrong way. That was a little bit more challenging. It happened on my watch in 2006. Admiral Keating, then commander of U.S. Pacific Command, gave me a call one day. Normally when a 4-star talks to a 2-star, it's a one-way conversation. And they said, you've been selected by the country of Indonesia. I said, whoa, for what? Oh, Indonesia wants Hawaii to be the state partnership. Hawaii at that time, population of 1.2 million. Indonesia, 240 million Muslims, the largest Muslim democracy in the world. So I'm off to Jakarta to sign a state partnership agreement at that time with the Minister of Defense, Sudarsono. And in my first meeting, I said, Defense Minister, maybe we should wait a bit. There's no rush, because in the week prior, the chairman of the Joint Staff, General Peter Pace, had visited Indonesia, and there were riots in the streets against the United States of America. So I said, maybe the timing is not so good. We can wait. And the minister said, no, generally, we sign now because Hawaii is okay. Everybody loves Hawaii. It's as if we were a different nation. So we started it. And again, like all state partnerships, what we do is directly related to what the country needs. So I wouldn't say recovery, but they just got stabilized after the notorious Aceh earthquake and tsunami of 2004, a couple years ago. You know, we remember the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami from Japan at the loss of 20,000 Japanese lives. But the Aceh earthquake and tsunami killed 250,000 Indonesians. You can't comprehend the level of loss. 250,000 people perished. Job number one, Dr. Chip McCrary, head of the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, immediately dispatched with the Hawaii National Guard to Jakarta to establish the early warning network within the Indonesian islands to buy them time as they experience earthquakes and tsunami in the rim of fire. And we upped the ante of reporting deep sea buoys from 5 to 50 across the Pacific. So that was the first step. The second thing was in emergency response, I told my team, let's not be prescriptive and tell the Indonesians what we would like to do. Let's encourage them to tell us how we want to team together in emergency management and humanitarian assistance. So they said, good. Our number one topic is how do you handle an emergency for exploding volcanoes? Ooh, we had to learn quickly. Apparently it happens often in the Indonesian archipelago, and they just wanted to reduce the loss of life from thousands to 100. But what we ended up doing with the Indonesian emergency management system was changing it from a centralized government where everybody looked to Jakarta for response to a system more like ours where all the provinces, the governors in the provinces were responsible for emergency management of their disasters in their location. And then the central government will assist the provincial governors in managing the disaster. So as previously, if Jakarta didn't act, then the people in the provinces would suffer. And then the final change that's still ongoing today is that we, in working with the Indonesian military, the TNI, under Suharto, the dictator, the Indonesian military did not have a good reputation. In fact, many members of Congress would not support any efforts for Indonesia. So we advised them that you should have a peacekeeping force. So we helped start the peacekeeping, UN peacekeeping school in Yogyakarta. And Indonesia, along with other Southeast Asian countries, started to provide troops for UN peacekeeping. In particular, what the Indonesian Army trained for and are still doing today is that they're providing peacekeepers between Israel, Lebanon, and the Golan Heights, keeping the Israelis and Hezbollah apart. And I say, it's a lot better to have Muslim peacekeepers than US troops on the Golan Heights. So Indonesia, to this day, still runs the peacekeeping operations in the Middle East. So from 13 countries to today, where we have 98 countries as of October 2022, The State Partnership Program is now supported and led by DoD. The National Guard doesn't do this on our own. We engage with all the combatant commands, the country teams, to make sure what we're doing, what the country wants, is in light with the overall scheme for the security of the United States and the world. During my time, we had a budget of $15 million to run the State Partnership Program. Today, it's $40 million. It is really cheap to have a persistent engagement with these many countries in the world. So during my tenure, and just like my colleagues in other states with their countries, we meet regularly with the Minister of Defense. So we're at the top level. I can assure you that when Russia invaded Ukraine, General Baldwin, the Adjutant General of California, was in on all the DoD meetings about what's going on in Ukraine. So I'd like to share quick stories about why the state partnership mattered. And of course, after 2014 and Russia annexed Crimea, it was a big engagement to upgrade the military forces of Ukraine. So California had the assistance of many West Coast states to work with the defense of Ukraine. They tell me surely in 2014, the armed forces of Ukraine was a basket case. They needed to get upgraded quickly. But the Californians tell me, working with Ukraine, they all said Putin's coming back for more. NATO wouldn't believe it. We didn't believe it. But the Ukrainians were serious about upgrading their military forces. The active duty force is quite small compared to the reserve forces, but this is where the National Guard came in and worked with the reserves or their territorial forces to make sure they knew how to use all the Western and former Soviet weapon systems. They knew how to shoot anti-tank Javelin missiles and other NATO anti-tank missiles, taught them how to set up anti-armor ambushes because all the reserve forces just stayed within their district. They didn't have to move around. They knew the terrain way better than the attacking Russian forces. So you all could see with the results that when Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, it wasn't the army of 2014. They took it to the Russians. So from a technology perspective, some game changers in my view, because the Russians wanted to eliminate the ability of Ukraine to communicate within the country and also within the weapon system. So to me, a game changer was Starlink being available not only for the population, but for use by the military forces. And I think also what's key was I called the younger augmentation force to the Ukrainian army. All the smart guys, the IT savvy tech guys that knew how to fly drones. Drones is another key changer in the current fight. So they looked for Russian positions, and as an army guy, they're undisciplined. They leave rubbish all over the place, so it wasn't hard to spot the Russian positions, and then they directed indirect and direct fire on the Russians. And then normal communications that we do in everyday life. So I was in Washington, D.C. on a national conference in April of this year, about a month after Russia invaded Ukraine. And as the Adjutant General of California tells it, in the State Partnership Program, the military forces see the country's military forces time and time again. We don't transfer. So when we have state partnership duties, they see the same colonel, the same major, the same sergeants. So he gets a message from this lieutenant in the Washington National Guard, gets a WhatsApp message from a Ukrainian lieutenant that he's worked with for a couple of years. And the message is quite frantic. It says, I fired a javelin, it didn't work. I forgot the misfire procedure. So he quickly types a return message on WhatsApp and then inquires after some time, did it work? More importantly, are you okay? The maximum effective range of a javelin is 4,000 meters, possibly 4,500, about 2.5 miles. A Russian T-80 tank, maximum effective range, they don't have too much of that left, is 3,000 meters. It takes a while to cover that distance. And after some time, the return message from the Ukrainian lieutenant is a video of a burning Russian tank. So I think it's also important from a technology perspective of what didn't happen. What didn't happen is the cyber attacks, the successful cyber attacks by the Russians, when they were able in 2014 to take down the Ukrainian grid by just getting into the system and shutting down the grid. Okay? Today, Russia has to bomb the grid in Ukraine with their cruise missiles that hit the target 60% of the time. So it's kudos to the Ukraine cyber defense along with the help from America and the Western nations. So I just covered a couple of points of the technology impact in the current Ukraine-Russia fight, but I kind of want to move over to what's the implications for us in the Pacific, and perhaps what might entail with China, Taiwan. Well, when I say we, the Hawaii National Guard and many other states are ready to transfer many of the successes of how we beefed up the Ukrainian reserve forces to Taiwan. But there's some different constraints. The good part is you have 100 miles of ocean between Taiwan and the Chinese mainland. The other negative perspective just recently is that Elon Musk says, I'm not so sure I want to use Starlink over Taiwan. I guess he's trying to protect his profits from the Shanghai Gigafactory. But you have rich entrepreneurs, Robert Sang, who has pledged $3 billion for the defense of Taiwan. I'm reaching out to Robert Sang to send him a message, buy as many commercial Starlink accounts as you can to get ready. And so key is, will Taiwan fight when there's a potential kinetic effect from China to Taiwan? There's some structural changes that have to occur. Similar to Ukraine, active duty forces in Taiwan is about I think 180,000, not large, but they have a mandatory conscription system where they feed the reserves. So they have 1,800,000 in the reserve system. But you need to understand the conscription system, which eroded over time to suit the political people running for office. So you get conscripted to the Taiwan army, you serve for only 4 months. What's the use of that? And so a 4 month of training, to me, just putting on your uniform, feeds your reserve forces of 1.8 mil. There has to be a structural change there. And although we're all willing, in order to be really effective in having a defense in depth, with the people of Taiwan to defend their island and their country. So that's, in a nutshell, is about how state partnership evolved from a system that the DoD didn't want, and now we could see the success from California and Ukraine, Illinois and Poland, and some of the things we could do. And the National Guard is ready for the transfer of lessons learned to Taiwan. We're just waiting for the kind of the official word, when to do this, but the Hawaii National Guard and other states wouldn't be making the preparations if we don't currently have the nod from U.S. Army Pacific and Commander Indo-Pacific. Shuji, you want to take questions now or
Yeah,
later?
why don't we, while it's fresh on everybody's mind, take one or two questions, if you don't mind, sir. Yeah, any questions in the audience?
Yes, sir. Are you at liberty to tell us what is this current state of play in terms of the demand signal that's been given to the Hawaii National Guard, perhaps in conceptual preparation to be able to execute? You said you're ready to execute, but are you able to tell us any taskings or direction you've been given?
Yeah. Only the point that the Hawaii National Guard is ready, and there'll be other states involved, because we want to give total support to Taiwan when it goes. The Hawaii National Guard does not have all the weapon systems that Taiwan has. We don't have Apache helicopters. We got F-22s instead of F-16s. So we'll have other states join the coalition to make sure Taiwan is covered down on all the weapon systems that they currently have or they want to have. But waiting for the green light.
I was just interested in whether there's a lot of other train advisor assist missions into places like the Philippines. Sorry, Australian, if you
Sure.
picked up.
Yeah.
Just if there was any cooperation between your outreach and your state outreach and other programs run by other coalition partners in the region.
Yes, we need all the coalition partners, especially in the Philippines, with the countries in the Pacific. That's part of the state partnership. There's never enough. $40 million doesn't go very, very far. We need our allies, and especially what's close is in Indonesia and in Papua New Guinea, where Australia has some influence on Papua New Guinea, and from our side to kind of diffuse the fight along the border and the disagreements between Papua New Guinea and in Indonesia. I think Australia will do a much better job than us, so we'll do other things as part of the coalition to bring up the Indonesian armed forces. I'm just thankful now there's no rioting in the streets in Jakarta when the United States leadership comes and visits.
It almost feels silly to be talking to a mic when you're right there, but
For the folks
for the benefit of everybody behind me. Just curious whether, as part of the state partnership program, are you able to do communications exercises with the folks that are part of that, and are you able to organize those so that when it comes time, that similar to like a command post exercise or an interoperability exercise across the coalition?
Great question. The answer is yes. But we want to make sure what the country has, how they operate, is linked with us. So in my discussions with Indo-Pacific and with the Taiwan generals, we want to make sure this information exchange works with what they have, and it's not an infusion of a lot of Western technology and equipment in order to make things work. Absolutely. Well, I think in Taiwan, the de facto embassy is the American Institute in Taiwan, and we encourage industry to work through them, their commerce and also their defense sector, and also, locally here for business. There's is the Taiwan Economic and Cultural Office locally, and it's manned. Their defense attaché is a Navy captain, Jack Wan, and they can kind of link industry with. They are interested in what we have to help them. It's called the Taiwan Economic and Cultural Office here in Honolulu, an extension of really the Taiwan Embassy. And the U.S. version is the American Institute of Taiwan. Under the One China policy, we can't have our own embassy. Okay. Thank you, Shuji.
Thank you, sir. So I think we're going to have a little bit of time towards the end here. My understanding is that we don't have anybody pushing to have this room after our presenters go. And so if you have additional questions, I hope our speakers can stay a little bit longer and field the questions that I'm sure every one of you have, especially after you collate all the briefs together. And I think it all kind of makes sense as far as partnership building and how basically we leverage the experimentation or the partnership programs for data dominance and technology dominance. So with that, I want to introduce a good friend and my former boss as our next speaker, Dr. Margot Edwards. So Dr. Edwards is the director of the Applied Research Laboratory at University of Hawaii and a senior research scientist at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. And Dr. Edwards currently leads the ARL at UH in its mission to imagine and develop agile, innovative, and cost-effective solutions to problems impacting our stakeholders, community, and planet. I like that, planet. Margot received her doctoral degree in marine geology and geophysics from Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory of Columbia University in 1992. Margot's specialty includes remote sensing of the seafloor using optical and acoustic systems. Margot is also the most avid baseball fan I've ever known. We went to a game that was 1-0 at the end, and she said, "What the most exciting game I've ever seen! What a defensive battle!" So with that, Margot, podium is yours.
Thanks, Sujay. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. So without giving too much gossip, I was also at that 1-0 18-inning Mariners game, right? And that was the best defensive game ever. So, am I going to pull up my first slide? Are you going to pull up my first slide? Where's the...
Let's see here.
Just the next one?
Yeah, it's the next. Let's see, how do we get to the next brief? You know, I have.
Where the hell's the cursor? This machine is really slow. Can't find the cursor. I thought there was just one speaker per session. Not the case at all.
Oh no, there's 5 speakers here.
5 speakers on this machine during this session. Okay, that's gonna be fun.
I'll just go while you guys
Let me
get
get
it.
clerical. This machine is not good. I can't even get out of this slideshow.
Maybe this is.
No, it's not
It's
that.
not gonna-
There we go.
It looks like that's the mouse right now. There we go.
So can you...
Let me do this.
There you go. That
Which
one?
are you?
It's opening up.
Oops.
It's a big one. It's got a big movie in it. So I'll just start talking. Can I pull this out of here?
Actually, no. Sorry.
Can I talk on that one?
Yeah, that would be fine. Thank you. Nice.
All right, so did you hear the one about, right? Sorry. So Unfortunately, Sujay, like the keynote speaker, I have to be back at UH today at 12:30. But if my slide comes up, you will see my email address, and you're welcome to write to me if you have questions. What Sujay asked me to do today was just come out here and think out loud about what we've been doing at the ARL. It is one model for how we could be partnering together with allies around the Pacific Rim. If you can see yourself fitting in with that, we're located at the Manoa Innovation Center in Manoa Valley, so you can come up and see us, and we'll tell you a little bit about what it is that we're doing. At the ARL, we're a group of technologists, lots of engineers, many students from the University of Hawaii. No offense to any other university, but the best university, right? A lot of smart kids coming out of the University of Hawaii. And what I wanted to present today, if it pulls up, and if not, you can just imagine what it's going to look like, is what's happening with rapid prototyping, right? So the movie that I was going to show you is a visualization of a shelf in our lab. And on any given day, that shelf is just cranking and cranking and cranking, printing out lots of different kinds of materials. And what really struck me as the director of the lab is that four of those printers that are sitting on the shelf that you'll see in the movie, maybe, cost $1,000 each, right? They cost $1,000 each.
Down arrow is advanced.
Okay, thanks. No, it's okay. All right, can still hear me? All right, have to lean over. So there's my email if you like this idea. So here should be the movie. It's thinking. It's just thinking because it's a. All right. I'm just going to stick with this one, and if the movie comes up, that'll be great. So the point I was trying to make is that these four printers each cost $1,000, and a kilogram of the material that goes into the printers. Yay! Okay. Yeah. Nope. The filament that goes with these printers costs $25 per kilogram, right? So what we've been doing at the lab is creating lots of prototypes, right? We take those prototypes out in the field and we try and break them. And what you can see over on this side is the next highest version of these 3D printers, which is the resin printer, which makes things a little bit better, right? Costs $4,000 and $250 for each kilogram of the material that goes in to make these items, right? So 3D printing has become a huge game changer from between entities that have lots of resources and entities that don't have lots of resources, right? So I'll just go to the next slide. Maybe. One of the things that we have been developing are some UAS droppable sensors, right? And what's important about what we're doing with this is we heard about tsunamis, right? The Sumatran tsunami, Fukushima, right? We've had a couple here in Hawaii that were not very good, right? And so we came up with the idea with sponsorship from an organization called the National Maritime Intelligence Integration Office, right? NIMIO is funding us to develop sondes that we would drop from a UAS. They're meant to be dropped at about 10 meters altitude, right? So they'll drop down into the water and they'll measure the properties of the water. For those of you that have, experienced tsunami, hurricanes, everything in the garages of a hurricane gets pulled out into the harbor, right? All these nasty chemicals, your paints, your gasoline, right? You don't want to put people in that. Why would you want to put people in that? So the idea with these sensors is we fly out with the UAS, we drop these things, they cost $5,000 to make with this rapid prototyping approach, right? So the ones that we've been developing, 8 out of 10 times, they actually work, right? So if they're $5,000 and 2 of them didn't work, That's $10,000 that I've lost compared to potentially putting a person in danger, right? So this model that we're trying to develop is that you rapidly prototype these things, you go out, you figure out what works, commercial off-the-shelf technology, and yeah, we're just sort of skipping through the movie. And if they have a very good success rate, then you go to the next iteration, right? You go to the next, here it is, finally, the mini sonobuoy, right? So, Raspberry Pi, right? Oh, can we go, back one? Obviously, I should not have been rooting for the Mariners or something. Oh my God. Okay. All right. Stand over here. So can we go back one slide?
Oh, God.
Yeah. All right, so you saw it. You remember it, right? It's frozen in your mind. Oh my gosh. So the mini sonde is this long, right? It's 4-inch diameter clear PVC. Costs $5,000 to build. $4,500 of that is that acoustic communication device that's actually the landing point of the mini sonde, right? That's what hits the water. That's a commercial system. We didn't develop it. We have the communications for undersea, if you've got some undersea node that you want to communicate with. And we have mostly RF, but if you wanted to, we could do Wi-Fi communications at the surface. Not going to work in a wavy environment, right? But in a harbor, right? It's a perfect tool. So you fly it out there, you drop it in the water, 8 out of 10 times it survives. If you need 10 of them, right? $50,000, 40,000 of it has been put to good use. The information comes back to you so that your first responders know what they're able to do. So here's the partnership model. This is where I was going. What we learned from Zoom, right, is how good all of us are communicating with people some distance away, right? So what we're doing in our lab, the computer camera is looking down at the Raspberry Pi as it's being soldered to all the components, all the sensors that are going into the mini sonde, so that between Hilo and University of Hawaii, we can show them how to build their own mini sondes, because they have the same printer, and I'm not endorsing the printer that you saw. They have the same printer. We've sent them our CAD drawings, right, of how to make all of this stuff. And all of a sudden, the partnership is easy, it's inexpensive. It's the old adage of don't give the person the fish, teach them to fish, right? So what we're trying to do is develop this model and spread it around the Pacific Rim so that other nations that don't have the resources that we do, a $1,000 printer, a $4,000 printer, $5,000 in supplies, why not, right? That's the way to break these barriers to try and partner. Technology, yes, inexpensive technology, 3D printed, and smart students out of the University of Hawaii. And I'll leave it at that. How did you learn how to tap dance like that?
We're good now. Colonel Rosick doesn't have any slides.
Okay.
So we can
Keep it black.
Okay, so let me bring up our next speaker, Colonel Keith Rosick. He's at PACOM J85. So Colonel Rosick is currently the Deputy Science and Technology Advisor to the United States Indo-Pacific Command. In this position, and I think I said this earlier, that he's got a pretty daunting task, right? He's responsible for the S&T engagement with all the countries in the AOR. Colonel Rosick also provides advice to the PACOM commander and the PACOM staff in scientific matters and evaluates S&T solutions against requirements. Colonel Rosick entered the Air Force as a graduate of the ROTC program at University of California, Davis. After completing an educational delay program at the University of Notre Dame, he worked at the Air Force Research Laboratory's Munitions Directorate, developing weapons against deeply buried and hardened targets. He then served as an exchange officer in Freiburg, Germany, conducting advanced energetic materials testing before being competitively selected to the Air Force Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base, California. During Colonel Rosick's career, he also deployed to Afghanistan in support of Operation Resolute Support. Colonel, podium is yours.
Let me use this one as well. So, while I'm supposed to be an advocate for S&T, I went the old school route with the notes written down. So, and I'm a wanderer, so I will use this mobile mic as I go. So, thank you, Sujay, for the introduction. What he said was, it sounds pretty daunting. Of course, I don't do that alone, right? That we have many partners within PACOM, and then what I'd like to talk about today is how we partner with a lot of the allied nations across the theater. So a little bit of background so J8 talks about resources and requirements for the command, right? So there's some of that is experimentation, innovation. There's the S&T. There's some of the comptroller and some other functions and things like that. So, but it really is defining the requirements for the rest of services to meet Indo-PACOM requirements, and that's kind of one of the strongest. One of the biggest roles that J85 has is how do we communicate to the services what our requirements are for capabilities. And the reason I say that is because the services themselves actually get most of the funding and actually have very robust relationships with a lot of the countries in the AOR. And so at the Indo-PACOM level, we try not to duplicate that, right? We want to take advantage of what the Army, Air Force, Marines already have with the various nations. So we're focused more on joint application. How do we get everybody to work together? But because we fund services, it's amazing that the services will develop their own independent solutions for a lot of things. So how do we make sure we combine that all together, as well as focus on maybe countries that do not have robust partnerships, right? So I'll get to that here in a little bit. But so of the 4 roles that J85 has, communicating requirements to the services is one of the big ones. Avoid technological surprise is another one, right? So we do at times review other things that are going on for us to understand, okay, what capabilities might this give an adversary if we see things that they're building, when it's capabilities that we see out in the open press, if it's infrastructure somebody's building, what does that allow them to do? And so from an S&T perspective, we'll add things there. So strengthening international defense partnerships through S&T. That's a strong one for us, as well as discover, develop, and demonstrate those S&T solutions for warfighting capabilities. So these last 2 is what I want to focus on today, is how do we demonstrate some of those capabilities and build those relationships with partners. So why do we do that, right? And I'll be honest, I think some of the other I can cut my talk way down because of some of the talks that have gone on before, to include General Rudd. But it's to build those relationships for a free and open Indo-Pacific, right? That is our goal, free and open Indo-Pacific. So how do we do that? That will look different based on the countries that we interact with. So technological S&T engagements with Japan and Australia are going to look different than the Philippines, Thailand, Oceania countries. But for good reasons. And what we just saw is that the barriers to entry for technology development are much lower, right? Before, when you needed a large industrial base to make some of these things happen, just the miniaturization of electronics and the computer software that is now so ingrained in all the things that we do allows us to actually do a lot more S&T in areas that we wouldn't have done before. But I will also say with a lot of these countries, well, we have heard today we're talking about combat capability. I was going to dance around the topic, but General Rudd threw it out there, right? So it's defense of Taiwan is something we're very concerned about. So that's, I think, what gets the focus. But for many of our partners in the area, right, it's law enforcement, it's illegal fishing, drug trafficking, human trafficking. That's some of their biggest concerns. humanitarian assistance, disaster response we've heard about as well, right? So there are many of the things that we can develop that may have a military application, but are equally applicable to post tsunami, post typhoon recovery. When you start talking resilient comms, resilient power, water purification, there are a lot of S&T programs that we can invest in and work with partners to do those things that aren't necessarily direct combat capability, but allow us to partner with nations in the AOR. So some of the tools that we do use is SME exchange, subject matter expert exchanges. So it could be simply meeting with them. What are your needs? Here are things that we have being worked on. How do we work together? And exchanging of information. That's usually one of the easiest, but one of the most important to talk with partners in the region. Along those lines, so we have the POST conference, Pacific Operational Science and Technology Conference here on Oahu in March. And so that's usually inviting most of the partner nations to show up. And so we can talk a lot more of that international experimentation at that conference there. So I get a little plug in for us, right? I'd have to do that sometime during the talk. So experiments, while there's plenty of exercises going on, there's plenty of joint exercises, bilateral exercises. Each, we think RIMPAC here, that's right, the biggest that we all know of, but that's a Navy Third Fleet exercise, right? So there are plenty of opportunities for us, whether it be service-specific or joint exercises, to tack on experiments. So that's one of the ways that we try to get a lot of work done, so that much of the planning can be done with folks who do this on a regular basis, but we can use that environment to really learn how some side programs would actually affect operations. And then all the way up to Crimson Viper is our S&T exercise with Thailand. So it's a smaller exercise when compared to some of these others, but it's dedicated to looking at S&T solutions for bilateral relationships between Thailand and the U.S. So the focus tends to be on border security, maritime domain awareness, tracking. Obviously, the last year, tracking of health and maybe pandemic response, as you see using the rings and the monitors you have now. Can you start tracking illness through a population? So it's those kinds of that are high-tech applications, but not for large combat applications. So that's that range of tools that we use to integrate these S&T solutions and see what might come out. So like I said, the goals will be different based on what those engagements are, depending on the country. And so we have traditionally, there's the big countries we've got. Oceania is one that we want to focus on a bit more now. The Solomon Islands came up as an example, right? So Solomon Islands, basically accepting the suitcase full of cash diplomacy from China to invest in infrastructure. And they, from what I know, what's been out in the open, they've been very upfront that, hey, U.S., you've neglected us, and we have. We've neglected the Oceania region for a long time, and they're playing ball, right? So there's nothing we can we can try to recover from that, but working very closely with our Five Eye partners, right? So Australia and New Zealand have much better relationships for a lot of those countries than what we do, and so how do we let them take the lead and support them through all the work that they already do, and just make sure that we're supporting those applications. So that's an area we'd like to strengthen it on top of all the other things that we heard General Rudd talk about, Philippines, Thailand, Korea, all the nations that we work with on a regular basis. So that's an emphasis for us going forward. And so, okay, so what technical areas are you worried about, right? There are a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of things that moving forward, while there may be military applications, there's a lot of others. So maritime domain awareness, I think in this forum, so information sharing of where ships are, understanding who's moving where, While there's always that purely defense aspect, in this region, right, when we start talking about the illegal fishing and law enforcement applications, right, so it's the U.S. Coast Guard has actually a much closer relationship, as well as like I said, Australia and New Zealand. So maritime domain awareness, whether that be sensors, whether that be transmission of the data, where do we collect the data, how do we have a maritime common operating picture and understanding that. So those are all technical applications of things we'd be interested in. Resilient comms, so whether that be redundant systems, whether that be things like Starlink, commercial systems. I know that's the big one now people talk about, but there are others coming on board. I think Amazon's got one coming up. I can't remember the name of it, but as others will follow. So how do we take advantage of those in terms of resilient comms, as well as resilient power? And even water purification. So those are technologies that would help during a HADR, a HADR, humanitarian assistance disaster response. From the military side, right, you've got folks maybe operating in areas that don't have quick access. So how do you provide clean water, clean power to get the mission done? So those are kind of some of those applications that I think would be very interesting for folks developing here to then plug into the different exercises we have. Maybe RIMPAC, but it could be Koa Moana, it could be Bala Katan, all the other ones that we have, right? There's multiple opportunities. And so I'll kind of end it I'm in terms of, and open up for questions, but in it, how do we go forward, right? So I say, hey, there's opportunities to do that, right? Because we don't get funded, it really ends up being how do we try to integrate? And so the programs that we've put forth to try to get funding to do that would be for some integration. So it's not us funding development of something, but bringing that widget system, whatever it is, into an environment that we can do the learning that you really can only use or can only get from sometimes these exercises. Example, autonomous system. For surface vessels used in calm waters, you throw it out out here, and you operate here locally. You've got thousands of miles of water just building up waves, and so throwing that into that kind of environment, you'll learn things even to, hey, this hatch wasn't secure in terms of water getting in and electronics burning out. So it could be as simple as just the environment you're operating in, as well as maybe envelope and being an aircraft guy, an Air Force background, you think of flight envelope, but it's the same thing in terms of sea states and vision acuity for systems or radar returns in high sea states, all those kinds of things. There's those envelopes. How do we take those systems and put them into environment to really wring them out in a way that we can do real learning? I'm going to put my test background out here. Is if you're not learning, you're not collecting data, then you're not doing it right. To feed that back into system development. If your event is just, and the success is just putting on an event, you're probably wasting somebody's time and money. So I would say make sure you're learning when you do it, because that's my background, and so I will always throw it out there. What did you learn, and how do you make it better? So I'll just go with that. But what I'm hoping to do here is just to kind of give you an overview of what from Indo-Pacom, how we're trying to take things that folks are developing, whether that's from the services to work with larger partner nations, or it could be developed at UARCs, different universities, or smaller businesses, and integrate them into larger exercises so that we can do that learning. And again, because there's so much technology being developed based on the 3D printing and the software and all the things that have lowered that barrier to entry for a lot of these types of technologies, that I think we can actually make a lot of progress quickly. And then there's always the funding aspect. Like I said, we're trying to get some things to do more integration and bringing folks to these things versus the development themselves that will stay with the services. So I don't want to overpromise of what we can do in terms of a funding aspect, but that's how we'll try to get all these things together. And again, focusing on joint and possibly scenarios that are not something that the Marines would work directly with the Philippines, as an example, right, of just you've got those bilateral relationships already working. So that's what I'm hoping you get an overview of, but I'm happy to open to questions. You have specific things you'd like to ask me about, so over to you for questions.
Earlier today, the chief of staff had a question about what's the belly button to get industry engaged with our allies and partners. Maybe you could tell the audience here a little bit about how the Post is able to do just that, and then also J82 industry.
Yeah, so thanks for that. As far as the belly button, actually, if industry does want to come and talk to Indo-Pacom from an S&T perspective, our office is the one that they'll come to. So J8, a lot of folks will, I'll be honest, some folks want to go directly to the commander or the deputy commander, or they go to Dr. Kailiwai, who's the J8 director. And a lot of times we'll kind of, hey, let's start with us. And then there are things that do need to be sent up, and some others are just industry partners just trying to find out how to get anywhere, right? And working with the government is tough, right? I do that every day. I work with the government and I know exactly how hard it is. So, but it is our office. There will be, if you do reach out to me or Dr. Martin Lindsay is my boss directly. We'll send you. There's an industry visit request. And there's just a legal review because some businesses have contractual requirements with the government already. And so it's just a matter of making sure, hey, here's what we can discuss, can't discuss, and those kinds of things. There's a little bit of that gatekeeping, but I've never heard anybody have a problem coming to meet us if they desire. It's usually more availability of the personnel, right, that kind of thing. But there is a venue. Post, again, is a good opportunity to see not just what Indo-Pacom is worried about, but we have our Five Eye partners, as well as other ally nations come and speak, and they can talk about what their requirements are as well. So that's a good place to get a good understanding of a broader set of requirements, not just what I would talk to here, but here. I've told you what I think other people want. You know, that's a venue for them to tell you what they want, which is a better way to go, obviously. So thanks. Did that answer it close enough? Hopefully. All right. Anything else?
Okay, our fourth speaker is, I enjoy the slides, right? I don't think so, yeah. No, they're not on there. Okay, our next speaker is Joe Cochin. He's the Executive Director of the National Spectrum Consortium, where he leads the 400-plus member coalition of wireless technology companies and researchers to promote American leadership in advanced wireless information technologies. So NSC provides a forum for collaboration and helps fund and create breakthroughs in spectrum and spectrum-dependent capabilities for the Department of Defense and other federal agencies. Joe mostly recently served as CEO and co-founder of US Ignite, responsible for leading the organization in its mission to accelerate the smart community movement as high-tech, high-impact nonprofit. He was also principal investigator and project director for the Platforms of Advanced Wireless Research Project Office, a $100 million program funded by the National Science Foundation and a consortium of more than 35 wireless companies and associations. He continues to serve as a volunteer on US Ignite's board of directors. Joe is an alumnus of Princeton University and lives in Washington, D.C. with his wife and 2 sons. Joe, all yours.
I did have some slides. Are you sure that it? That's not it. Nope. There's not. It's not on there. I sent them earlier this week. It's okay. Do you have your thumb drive?
It's on my laptop.
Do you have a copy of it? I mean, I have it in email, but this was probably not hooked up to email.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't think that's
No,
gonna work.
I don't have a copy. Okay. That's all right. Don't worry about it. I will make do. Hello, everybody. It's good to be here. It's a good thing. As much technology as we work with all day long, I kept some paper. So, anyway, I'm Joe Cochin. It's great to be here. It's really great to hear what's going on here. I was recently, I guess this summer, nominated to serve as the executive director of the National Spectrum Consortium, which is a 418-member consortium of technology companies in the wireless communication space. And you heard some of the speakers earlier today talk about partnerships and prototyping and new wireless communications technologies, and that's exactly what the National Spectrum Consortium is. That consortium of 418 companies has a OTA, another transactional authority contract, an innovative prototyping and demonstration and testbed contract with DoD, where we have put about $1.2 billion worth of prototyping and test contracts through. Some of the things that you may have heard and seen are some of the 5G wireless testbeds that are at about 4 or 5 bases across the country now. There's a whole host of other things, not just focused on wireless communications, but really anything that touches spectrum. So radar, weapon systems, other things like that. But the basic concept here is that it's a network of innovators specifically designed and built to partner with the federal government. The 418 organizations, which are in an awesome chart that I would show you, except you can't see it. But it includes this giant yellow one, which represents about 53% of our membership, which are small, non-traditional companies. So membership is open to anybody in the space who pays the de minimis dues and wants to be a part of potentially partnering with the federal government to express where in the technology they have solutions that may meet a need through industry days, gatherings such as this, other partnership opportunities, and then to respond to solicitations from the federal government and from DoD specifically, although not limited to talk about what their capabilities are. And it is a mechanism that allows for much faster, more flexible, more rapid prototyping among these technology organizations, which could include, by the way, academic research organizations and others. But one of the interesting things about it is in order to build that partnership that we are talking about, that public-private partnership with the federal government, there are mechanisms in place whereby the executive leadership of the consortium and the respondents there is an incentive for there to be smaller and non-traditional performers in the consortium. That is effectively what it's built for. It is built to foster partnership, again, between the federal government and industry, but also among industry members when responding to and talking about and imagining some of the new technology solutions in the spectrum and wireless communication space. They can meet, they can form partnerships that respond to some of these RPPs, we call them, these solicitations, and propose some of these new and innovative solutions to the federal government. In and among with those smaller companies and their technologies, there's a lot of new and innovative ideas, which is exactly what we are talking about pulling forward. That's what this partnership can do. That's what prototyping can do. But prototyping is also a good place to figure out whether or not any of that stuff's going to work. And that's exactly the design here. And it is a more flexible, more innovative give and take between a federal office, a DoD office with a need, and an industry partner or a group of industry partners who have something new that they want to bring forward that probably would not survive a traditional contracting environment that without that give and take. I'll say that we are the premier organization representing all of the largest communication companies and also the most innovative academic researchers. And like I said, membership is 53% smaller and non-traditionals. So it is the place to go to pose questions. Like, for instance, over the summer when I joined, OUSD RNE posed the question, if we were to look at ways in which to accelerate the development of Open RAN technology within the United States, how would we do that? What should we do? What kind of gaps are there? What kind of programs, what kind of research needs are there? What kind of other ways in which policy changes or other things could DoD and the federal government do to prime that pump and get more of that innovation happening in the United States, which we DoD view as critical to our national defense, not just each individual system we buy, but the broader ecosystem of that technology being developed in the United States is in fact a national security priority in and of itself. What do we do about that? And so we kicked off an advisory committee that is about 4 months into its work now, 3 months into its work now, but probably before the end of the year, we'll provide a series of recommendations from industry writ large, big companies and small ones, that says here's a roster of ideas that you could fund or make happen from within DoD or outside of DoD with the other federal agencies, NTIA and others who are looking at funding some of this effort. Here are things that you could do that we believe would help kickstart this ecosystem or further it here in the United States. Spectrum broadly is becoming more and more critical to almost everything that folks do. There isn't a single new technology system, consumer, defense, or otherwise, that is developed without some kind of wireless communications capability built within it. And whether or not you're talking about something that's licensed and goes up on a commercial network, something that's proprietary to DoD and goes on a DoD network, or something that just has a Bluetooth or a Wi-Fi connection, or folks have mentioned now 3 or 4 times Starlink. All of that, almost everything we talk about now in the technology space has one or more of those components built in. The National Spectrum Consortium's goals are to deliver 2 essential outcomes: breakthroughs in spectrum and spectrum-related technology capabilities, new ways in which to use those things, and then policy and technical insight to help advise the federal government, the FCC, NTIA, DoD, everybody else, about where some of the problems and concerns will arise and why this technology is not moving farther and faster into adoption. At the end of the day, what we are talking about here is an alignment of incentives to create the right economic and technology environment to produce more innovation. Companies want to do business with the federal government. The federal government wants to fund and buy new innovative technology. If you go through a regular procurement, you often are going to miss some of the very new and cutting edge things. By the same token, some very new and cutting edge things may not work, or they may not work how everybody wants them to work. And so, can you do something faster, put money and ideas through the system faster to produce results that everybody can get their heads around and say, aha, well, this is something that is worth a much larger, longer term investment, and we should go and do that. Again, being able to cause those partnerships to happen with larger organizations who traditionally provide DoD with a lot of these systems, and smaller new innovative companies, and then with all of those folks and with the DoD, those are 2 of the most critical portions of partnership that the National Spectrum Consortium represents. I had another one of these little charts that would have been good to show you, but it's one that you've seen before actually, so you don't have to see it. It's the Valley of Death chart. Perfectly normal, everybody's seen it. The places where the Valley of Death, the place where the Valley of Death reaches its nadir here, reaches the bottom, is in the prototyping phase, right? There are plenty of federal agencies, even within DoD, DARPA, the labs, who will fund basic science research. A ton of public money goes into that. Once you get all the way to something that works, there are a ton of commercial entities, investors and others, who will take that and figure out how to scale it, how to get it in the right consumers' hands, how to get it in front of the right people who are going to pay for it. That gap is literally where you have the National Spectrum Consortium and other entities like it exist. On top of all of that, however, you have the other problem, which is that spectrum is a highly regulated and highly contested resource. And so you can't even get the normal entities that would come and try to fill that prototyping gap to do so, because if you are in your garage trying to do innovation and just have an example, a demo, a bench test, you can't get Spectrum to put that demo device on without going to find a large company or the federal government or somebody else to help you. And that process is complicated. You're met with a lot of no. Even if you were able to get a yes, it still may not be enough or be able to work, right? You might go out and get an experimental license from the FCC, but that's not good enough because your power level is too low and you can't really show what you were trying to show. It is the kind of thing that is a perfect topic for public-private partnership. It is almost impossible to now think about a new innovation in wireless technology without also worrying about the FCC or DoD or an existing commercial system. Even in those existing commercial systems, if you have something that is going to use spectrum in a more flexible way, Starlink is a great example, you are going to immediately run up against 50 or 70 years of history in technology development around it. And, there isn't a better example. I always say that when what I do rises to the level of something that ends up in a general newspaper or around a dinner table, it's mostly not for good things. So, right, 5G is going to microwave my cat, or whatever, right? Oh, airplanes are going to fall out of the sky because the altimeters are being interfered with by your cell phone. That is an incredibly complex problem that needs to be unwound not by the typical policy and political talking points where one industry association hires their lab to say this definitely interferes, and the other one hires their lab to say it definitely doesn't. And then you dump all of that on some congressional committee where some 85-year-old congressperson is like, well, I don't know, people, because this just looks like nerd stuff to me. why is this not working, and are the airplanes going to fall out of the sky or not? That's a ridiculous way to solve a policy problem. It is also the kind of thing that fits very nicely into a world of prototyping and demonstration. You could pretty rapidly go find some technologist who will go to a place, go find a DoD facility or elsewhere where they control some spectrum and say, let me show you. Let's do it a bunch of times. Let's see what we can actually, let's have everybody stand here and watch and see whether or not it's going to work. Now, I'm not suggesting that the National Spectrum Consortium could have solved that problem. What I am suggesting is that's the kind of place that's perfectly built to solve these kinds of problems. On top of all of that, what's nice about the NSC is the industry is represented because the industry has an incentive to want to provide input to DoD and then potentially win prototyping contracts to do demonstrations. That is not a typical lobbying or other organization, of which there are plenty in DC where I come from, who advocate for one side or the other of a particular issue in spectrum. The nice thing about that is it is a place where you can go and have a technology conversation about what may or may not be possible, way ahead of any policy or other concerns, which are going to happen, and those organizations can go ahead and advocate for their needs later on, but you can have the basic prototyping and technology conversation ahead of time. One great example here on this slide is the PATS, what we call the PATS working group, and it's one of a number of working groups that we host, where Congress expressed an interest, a desire to figure out ways in which DoD can share the 3.1 to 3.4 gigahertz spectrum band that it currently uses exclusively, and asked DoD to figure out what they could or couldn't share within that band and how they could do so. And the NSC has become sort of a neutral environment where we can even host a classified conversation among industry members and the DoD to talk about, okay, these are the systems that are currently in that band. These are the kinds of things that they do. Here are ways in which what they do could be changed or altered. Here are the places where they do them. What could you do with this? Working in the areas that are not currently being used, or potentially helping us consolidate use on the DoD side to free up a chunk of spectrum that could be used on the commercial side. Again, that's the kind of conversation that will eventually devolve into an argument about what policies should be put in place and who should win the auction and what are the auction reserve prices and all this other stuff that's important and necessary, and I'm not being critical of. But if you start there, you skip the piece about what's possible. Are there any new ideas here, or are we just going to go right back to that old fight that we always have about auctions and guard bands and all these other things, which, again, necessary, important conversations, not technology conversations. Those are policy and economic conversations and should be had in the places where they have them. So I guess what I'll leave you with is that I view the National Spectrum Consortium as sort of the perfect example of some of the partnership that we are talking about here, living and breathing right now today. We are very welcome, of course, to new members, and we are very welcome to talk to folks within DoD who potentially have problems or issues that could be solved with this mechanism, and could partner with us to issue prototyping solicitations through the NSC to kick off another prototyping project. But I'm very grateful to be here, happy to answer any questions. Again, I think it's an important and necessary conversation, and I'm really glad for this today, so thank you all.
Hi, Joe. Earl Matthews, former Air Force. I fully understand the painful spectrum business, especially after my experience in Kosovo. My question is, what will be the role of the National Consortium to help shape the national DoD strategy with the sell-off of bandwidth, understanding, what the foreign nations are trying to do in regards to spectrum? What will be the role of the consortium to help shape that?
It's a great question, and I'll answer it two ways. I mean, I have personal thoughts about spectrum sharing and spectrum strategy that I'm happy to offer. I won't here, but I do have some. But I think the consortium itself, again, plays a very interesting role because there's a place in which battle lines have been drawn in that particular conversation as well, which is, it started with, over my dead body, no sharing, mine and not yours. We don't need this, many years ago, to, man, you have a lot of cool new technology that we'd really like to get into, all the way evolving to, hey, wait a minute, we can't possibly continue to go and develop custom-built non-commercial solutions that require a ton of R&D money and only ever have a limited market because they exist in a band that nobody else around the world or even in the country uses. All the way to, you now have this, frankly, sort of political conversation about, wow, this spectrum is pretty valuable and we could stick some money in the treasury. How about that band? How about this one? And all of a sudden, you see legislation come that does not necessarily take into consideration anything that anybody has to say about anything. Technology, policy, DoD weapon system, doesn't matter. Somebody wants to fund a priority and they see a pot of money and they say, do this. Well, that's a silly way to make this decision. I think, again, talking about ways in which to align incentives, I think enough folks within DoD now understand that though it may be very difficult and complicated, that our technology has evolved, that wireless technology has evolved and wireless networking has evolved to be software defined and able to be dual used, able to be shared. You don't necessarily have to go down this path of custom hardware development, custom silicon development. You actually could find bands where instead of, this is DoD's and don't come near me and don't talk to me about it and don't ask me any questions, don't touch, you could say, over this set of frequencies, we would like to be able to do the following things, and we would like to do custom technology development such that you could build a wireless network. I mean, look, DoD folks all have a cell phone in their pocket almost anywhere they're going. They want to be able to use wireless technology, and if you could say, look, we can put one network in this band, we can segment, slice, and secure a certain portion of it over the same hardware or portions of the same hardware that could be used for DoD-only applications, guaranteed, untouchable, et cetera, but you don't have to necessarily worry about every 9 months upgrading some system. And by the way, we can pay for a lot of that by taking some portion of that capacity and selling it commercially, using it for not just, and again, you have to get more creative than just, this is for cell phones, commercial public network, and nothing else, or this is just for, there's going to be a ton of things in which you want, IoT or smart city type sensors communicating. And what's to say that, especially in the continental United States, that DoD wouldn't be willing to share with like an electric system that was firing back, signals about grid capacity? On what earth is that's already secure, critical technology that is not somebody watching cat videos on YouTube? Why wouldn't you find a way in which to share and get that traffic off of a cellular network where it's competing with cat videos watching YouTube, and put it on a network where it's like, hey, in an emergency, we're going to pull this giant lever and dump all of your random sensor traffic from your electric grid because we have an emergency. Most people would say, great, please do that. And then when you're done, put the lever back up and we'll go back to doing our sensing. And isn't that an interesting way to do sharing? And isn't that a better sharing partner for other critical infrastructure or public, national security infrastructure than, hey, look, there's just going to be a constant crushing demand for consumer bandwidth on this band, and it's just going to constantly encroach and get closer and closer geographically and on the spectrum chart to what you're doing, and I hope you can deal with the interference. That's, to me, it seems like a better way to do this would be to find other ways in which to develop dual-use technology that are embedded from the start in a spectrum sharing environment. Great, thank you all.
Put that brief up, the last brief.
Yeah. Coordinate Federation. Is that it?
No.
Do you know what's it called?
It's in the tides. This Edwards. No, it's FCA.
TechNet.
No, it's not that. It's the tides.
M. Edwards?
No, it's called Tides. Tides 22. FCA.
I just don't see it. God damn.
Yeah, you want to put the stick back in?
Yes.
I don't know if they put that back in there or not. We'll just run it straight from we can run it straight from the stick. Okay, so while we're waiting for the last brief, we're down to the final stretch here. So you just heard 4 pretty impressive briefs talking about enablers, technology, partnership building, and how we go about making a difference, right? So what I'm going to do in this last brief is try to tie that all together as to how technologists can contribute and can make a difference for the Indo-PACOM, for the other warfighting units, contributions to
Tides?
where we're going. Yep. It's called Tides 22 FC. Yep. And if I want to use the mouse, I can do that.
Sorry?
If I want to use the mouse, okay, here's the mouse right here. Yeah, I got it. Okay. And how do I? Okay. Okay. So how do we? So tying all that together in partnership building and in technology, how do we move to the next step? This is we talked about technology. Joe talked about the spectrum. So where do we go next from here, right? So a couple of years ago, University of Hawaii Applied Research Lab, Margaret Edwards, who had to leave for an important meeting, and Georgia Tech Research Institute embarked on this platform called TIDES. Okay, now some of you, how many people here have heard TIDES? A few. Okay, a lot of you have. Okay, and some of you even maybe participate. So how many people have participated in TIDES? Just one over here, right? So we're going to give you an opportunity to participate in the 2022 TIDES after the brief here. Okay. So basically, what exactly is TIDES? Okay, you probably want to know, right? You've heard it before. One person in here has participated before. So what is it? So let me see. In a nutshell, here's what it is. All right. So the acronym actually means something here. The T is technology. We're all technologists here. So the bottom line is, how do technologists contribute technology to enable a warfighting mission for the combatant commander? The incubation portion is, so this is a process in how we go about experimentation. So if you were a technologist doing research, or if you're a technologist in the past doing assessments, experimentation, tests, you are a part of the TIDES network, essentially, right? So it's a more rigorous kind of structure way of thinking about technical and operational experimentation. We kind of do things dope type in experimentation. We do things CONUS a lot. We do things in exercises, and we do things maybe sometimes in a relevant event, in the operational event, right? But we don't tie it all together. So the idea of TIDES is we're trying to tie all the type of experimentation that we do as technologists together in one single kind of a platform so that we can look at it from a perspective, of a holistic perspective of how technology and how experimentation can help us with the lessons learned that we've talked about and that General Lee's talked about and Margot and everybody else talked about, from partnership enabling to rapid prototyping to essentially going out in the field and developing a better relationship with our Indo-PACOM allies. So the idea is that you want to be able to incubate before you put it out to the field for the military to look at. D is demonstration, and when I look at incubation, we do things in the U.S. When I look at D and E, that's going out to the operational exercises. So I'm going to kind of follow a little bit on what Colonel Rosick talked about. It's going out in his theater. So why, this is actually my favorite slide. So if you pay attention to any slide that I've got, this is the one to pay attention to, and this is in line with General Lee and Colonel Rosick and Joe and what Margot talked about, right? So this slide, the title is Global Experimentation Equals Enduring Value, essentially. So again, when we think about experimentation, we think about experimentation that we do here in the U.S., and sometimes we will go out to the exercises. But if I'm developing a next generation UAV, and we as technologists, we're very focused on the technology performance of that development, right? So for example, if I'm going to develop the next Group 1 UAV and I'm going to take it to Yuma, you're going to ask me, how high does it fly? Okay, I'm going to tell you 500 feet. Next question you might have is, what sensors can it carry? All right, maybe a pound maybe, so I get EOIR in there. How far can it see? Well, if I'm at 500 feet, line of sight's about 90 miles or so I can see quite a bit. I think it's 9 miles actually. So those are all technical questions that you have for me. So I go to Yuma and I test this UAV that DARPA is developing or another organization within our DoD lab system. And yes, it flies 500 feet every time for 30 minutes every time, and we're ready to hand it off to the warfighters. Here's the problem. We don't fight in Yuma, okay? We don't fight at 29 Palms. And the next thing you know, you take it out to an operationally relevant environment, and this is what happens. All right, this is a DARPA UAV that we tested the heck out of it in Yuma and 29 Palms and gave it to the warfighters. And the first time we took it, the Crimson Viper, 2011, I believe, we were attacked by a Southeast Asian Sea Eagle. Okay, now, they don't have Southeast Asian Sea Eagles in Yuma, do they? So we could have never known. But if we knew that, this was an easy fix. What we could have done was just put a humming device on there, and it would have been okay. Now, Colonel Rosick's boss, Martin Lindsay, was there, okay, during this event, and he claims that this aha moment was the start of the counter-UAS program for the DoD. I don't know if I go that far, but it certainly enlightened the counter-UAS people as to see what operational experimentation is about. All right, so again, what's the difference between domestic experimentation and global or off-CONUS experimentation? Right, so we don't fight in the United States, we fight elsewhere. So operationally relevant environments is what we're all about. So these boxes actually have a meaning. Again, we talk about domestic experimentation have a really big box, and that gray box is called technical assessments, right? We're looking at the technical feasibility of a program. But if you go globally, or if you go into a country like Indonesia, or the Philippines, or Ukraine for all that matter, there are a lot of other aspects of how a technology performs to accomplish your mission, right? So you have to be aware of everything, not just the technical performance, but the cultural, logistics, interoperability. When you talk about interoperability, you're talking about interoperability between two countries, not between the Marines and the sailors and the Navy. All right. So another example I'll use, and Colonel Rosick, he set me up perfectly, talking about water purification. So we don't always just experiment with what I call kinetic technologies. We'll take what I call the benign technologies out to an AOR, because for humanitarian assistance, disaster response capabilities, right? And my former boss used to ask me, and this is a trivia question here, what do you think, and we talked about China, we talked about North Korea a little bit, what do you think in the past few decades has been U.S. Indo-Pacom's biggest enemy? Anybody care to guess? Who or what has been the biggest enemy? Mother Nature. All right? So we haven't had to go to battle with anybody, but we've had to deploy forces to clean up after typhoons. The event that happened in Fukushima, Philippines, Nepal, those are all operations that were caused by Mother Nature, right? So again, water purification is a way, as what Colonel Rosick talked about, for us to get into the country to kind of help out and assess the local population. So another example that I'm going to use is cultural assessments, right? You have a technology, and if you look at a water purification unit, there's not much to it. It's a purifier that's got a pre-treatment, ultra-filtration, a little bit chlorine, as long as it's got residual chlorine, you can drink it, right? So we're good to go. So we tested 1 million gallons of water coming out of some golf courses drainage ponds where the birds and other ducks are kind of sitting around. And every gallon of that from that water purification unit came out potable. Okay, we had the Navy Environmental Medicine folks test it, right? So ready to drink, right? Ready to take it out. Typhoon comes through. Your Indo-Pacific calls up, the guys with the water purification units. I get deployed out to Philippines on Christmas Day. We got this water purification element out there, and there you see. This is what we saw when we hit the ground running. All right. And you see in the middle of the night, we're producing water to help the people who was affected by it. 2 days later, a Philippine Armed Forces lieutenant comes up to me and says, "Sir, they're not drinking the water. They won't drink the water. They're going back to drinking their stream water, and they're getting sick." So what do you think the problem is? They're all potable. The water's potable. What's the problem? Anybody want to take a guess at it? Chlorine. They think we're trying to poison them. They've never tasted, the military, you have to have 1 part per million chlorine for it to be potable. They think we're trying to poison them. They don't trust Americans coming in with this. And it could be just a steel machine that they don't like, right? So again, cultural assessments. You need to be able to assess the problem area where you're going to be operating at. And so that's the whole idea of tides, essentially. And actually, we were able to go back to the Office of Naval Research, and within a year, they were able to develop a tasteless, odorless water purification unit that now can be used, and I guess the folks will drink it now. All right, so I think everybody gets the point of this view graph, right? All right. So this is a view graph that's in the works. This is the first or second time we've shown it. And so it kind of goes to tell you what tides is about. So we're doing tides, as I mentioned, the last couple of years. And what is the value proposition on tides, right? So there's a lot of words in here. There's a lot of goodness, a lot of adjectives that show that what tides or what operational experimentation or what technologies can do. Lessons learned from Ukraine. I would say that one of the key points on this slide, and I'm going to point you to it, is so you heard quite a bit about that today, right? So one of the lessons learned from Ukraine, and it's all published, is that we were behind the curve quite a bit when we went into Ukraine, basically. We knew it's coming. I heard that earlier. I'm not sure who I heard it from, maybe General Lee. We knew it's coming, but no one believed it, and no one prepared for it, right? So for the folks who work here in Indo-Pacific, you know what's coming next, basically. So that powerful statement that a friend of mine put together, we don't want to relearn the lessons in Taiwan that we had to do in Ukraine. So again, so this is a slide that's a work in progress. It's got a lot of nice words in there. I mean, you look at this thing, and I could push this anywhere, right? But words are just words. What are we doing about this, right? So I ventured, and I talked about what we're doing in tides here. All right. So I promised you earlier that I would tell you about 2022 tides. We're actually going to be out in Coconut Island on Friday to take a look at 5G technologies at the edge to enable operational mission areas in maritime domain awareness and other areas as well. I mean, communications is communication, right? So for the folks, I think Jeff out there is one of our architects for the Tides event. For the folks who haven't gotten an invite, I think we might have a couple seats, a couple places left because it's an island scenario. You're going on Coconut Island. It's for the folks who are my vintage group. I don't want to say age group, but my vintage group. It's Gilligan's Island, if you remember it, all right? So we're going to give you a couple of 3-hour tours to go on this boat, and you will see how 5G technologies at the edge will enable mission areas for the future. All right, so I'm not sure what time do we have here. If I got 5 more minutes, How many people here is from Hawaii? Just one. Okay, so most of the people here is from out of town, right? So this is just a series that we'll go through this in like 3 minutes, 3 or 5 minutes, okay? This is just a series of view graphs that basically promotes tides and asks technologists to come to the Indo-Pacific Theater to help out. So I mentioned earlier that the I in tides is the incubation, but it could also be the introduction, right? Colonel Rosick mentioned the Crimson Viper event in Thailand. It could be an introduction of how you come to Hawaii first, and if it's ready to go overseas, it's a little bit different story going overseas than just coming here to Hawaii, right? But it could be used as a screener. So I've got in here, like a David Letterman, the top 7 reasons why you should come to Hawaii, besides the beaches, the hiking trails, and all the wonderful scenery that you have here. So what are the top 7 reasons that we want technologists to come help Indo-Pacific out, okay? So one is if you're a technologist at DARPA, ONR, one of the service labs, a warfighting center, we want you to come over here because there's a lot of test sites that you can use, okay? Anywhere from, and not just on this island, Oahu, right? You got Kauai, you got PMRF in Kauai, a PTA on the Big Island, all this terrain out here. So again, it's an easy access to test sites that you may need for the technology development. Number 2, infrastructure and access. A lot of these test sites have been used already, so you don't have to recreate or reinvest in test equipment. Number 3, diverse terrain. I bet everybody thinks Hawaii is just this tropical, nice environment. Okay, well, I bet you didn't know that we had alpine as well, right? And just within a few miles away, you get right down to desert. If you've been into the Big Island, you know what it's about. The worst conditions that a lot of the military soldiers and Marines have seen, even beyond Afghanistan, is with the red clay, red dust in the Big Island of Hawaii by the PTA. And it's pretty nasty up there, right? Especially when you got a lot of 5-ton trucks, Humvees running around, that dust kicking up and you're sweating and you're moist, and it just kind of kicks up on your face and just sticks there. All right, you got mountainous terrain out here, right? And then of course you got the water, and I think we should probably put another, the number 5 in here would be underwater. Within a few miles out, you could be in 3,000 meters deep of water, essentially, okay? So Hawaii also has a significant amount of the climatic conditions the world has to offer. So there are 14 climatic conditions that have been listed as kind of available or that exist in the world. So guess how many Hawaii has? Anybody should take that guess? Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it all 14? How do you know that? So it is 10. 10 out of the 14 climatic conditions. So again, Hawaii is a great place to come and test because of the diverse terrain and the climatic conditions. Warfighter participation, right? Indo-PACOM is the only COCOM, think about this, it's the only COCOM that has all its components in one place. Just think about that. So if you want access to the Marines, the soldiers, the sailors, the airmen, and Special Operation Forces, it's all within about a 5-mile radius of each other. So it's all here. When you test technology, it's just not looking at the technical aspects, you're looking at the operational aspects. You need warfighter input. In Indo-PACOM and outside of Indo-PACOM, when you go into the theater, you hear General Rudder, 52% of the world surfaces from Hollywood to Bollywood, right? So Indo-PACOM is a great place to come if you want to get a really holistic viewpoint of what your technology does, not just technically, but operationally as well. COCOM operational venues. We talked about Crimson Viper, but there's a lot of other venues out there that you can participate. The big venues are Valiant Shield, RIMPAC, Calvin Saber, all there, but there's a lot of other smaller venues that you can participate in as well. Community of interest, right? We leverage off each other's effort. When you come to Hawaii, you come to Indo-PACOM, you basically see what everybody else is doing, compare notes, share information, and leverage off, complement off each other's investments so that you don't have to go at it alone. And the last one that we have is everybody is interested in workforce development, right? Basically, we want to keep our smart people here. I think that's all I've got. I'm going to open the floor back up now. I think General Lee is still here. Colonel Rozek, Joe, I'm here. Margo had to leave, but since I worked for her for a whole year, I think I can answer some of her questions. So feel free if you have any pressing questions you want to ask the speakers. Nope. Okay. I think everybody's ready for lunch, so we'll call it a day. And thank you for coming. And I think you have all of our contact information. And if something comes up that you have a burning question, just shoot us an email. Thank you.
Earl Matthews.